first episode of Sustainics. And I'm quite excited because that's the fourth podcast I said I would start. It's Monday, beginning of the week. There's no better time to try to do that. So Sustainics is about discussing what is going to make our life more sustainable. What sort of behavior do we need to change or adopt, challenge, consider new behaviors, and analyze the impact it's going to have around us on the environment first, right? We're talking about sustainability, durability, so on the world and the environment or ecosystem, right? This food chain we are part of, but also the impact it's going to have on people, obviously, and in particular on people we love, right, are dear to us. But not only, hopefully we'll have a little bit of selflessness kicking in, and we'll be discussing also what is beneficial to the greater good, right, in Sustainics. You need to start somewhere. And Sustainics, just like the Camel Hall, is really about setting up a framework, right? That's the purpose of the Camel Hall in general, setting up a framework for thoughts and actions for everyone, really. I start with myself and I'll sharing these ideas here. But it's really about discussing what can be an ongoing, useful, sustainable framework for life, right? So we've got the switch, which is about more mental health and internal introspection and personal well-being and performance. We've got drive and thrive, which is about high performance and ethical leadership. We've got the aim, the AI monitor, which is really about discussing the impact of the latest digital technologies on us. There will be kind mind, but most importantly now there is Sustainics. Okay, and you need to pick a topic to start this framework. And one of the key concepts I think is important in sustainability and durability, to me, beyond the art of crafting, I would say, is the art of mending, or should I say, the forgotten art of mending. And that's something I'd like to bring to the agenda and to the discussion today, right? Because repairing might be not only an interesting hobby, but it might be a necessity these days. And I'm talking about mending a lot of things here. Obviously, we're talking about stuff, these things that we surround ourselves with, items, furniture, means of transport, devices, dwellings, you name it. Right? So things, stuff that might need to be repaired and mended every now and then. And that's going to have a direct impact, of course, on the way we preserve our resources, our environment. But I would suggest that the concept of mending goes way beyond that. It's going to bleed into the space of relationships, of course. We all know that at times there can be damage, figuratively, not necessarily physical damage, but mental and emotional damage out of relationships which are broken, right? Or which are hurt by conflict, disagreement, lack of mutual understanding. And at the end of the day, we are tempted to just check out and let it go, right? And I'm going to choose this spot by the river to finish this introduction, because I think it's quite nice to be there by the river, a little bit far away from the traffic. I'm by the Rhone River, by the way. That's what is behind me. So mending in relationships, at work, at home, typically with our partners, but also between parents and children. That's also a big one. That happened to me, and I'll share my experience about that. So mending things and stuff, and the impact it's got on the environment, mending relationships, and the impact it's going to have on us and the world, really, generally speaking, in terms of broadcasting the right vibe and emotions. And I think really, if we want to be a little bit more intellectual and prospective, we are going to talk about mending and repairing also ideas, generally speaking. And when I'm talking ideas, I'm talking about them in a philosophical, political, social sense, right? There are a lot of ideas that mankind has had and has explored over the years and over the centuries. And some of them have been deprecated, have fallen into oblivion. And every now and then, they might be worth considering being revived. I'll give you just an example, a recent example, for instance. And I'm not trying to be the proselyte here about anything, but for instance, lately mankind has explored the idea of communism in the late 19th and 20th century. And communism has unfortunately led to, inconclusive or even, arguable consequences, in particular with the ex-Soviet Union, right? Former Soviet Union, where we've seen the communism emerging from, the theories of Karl Marx in particular, and then being, propagated by Lenin and then Stalin, and we've seen, Soviet Union implementing communism at scale, with the good, the bad, and the ugly of it, right? And then we've seen China, continuing that and still continuing to explore that, right? So, but for a lot of people in the Western countries, communism is an idea that is done, is not worth exploring anymore. Well, you never know, right? And that would be the same for a lot of philosophical ideas that we thought were dead, back to Egyptians, back to Greeks, back to Romans, and that now might, at the light of our technological innovation and new modern lifestyles, might be worth putting back on the table and maybe repairing them. Right? Communism maybe one day will be repaired, at least in the way it's been thought through and explored and implemented so far, right? It's just an idea. I know it's more abstract, but we'll talk about that. So this is just an introduction to the topic, but we'll talk also a lot about, the everyday necessity of having a mending mindset, so to speak. So in that sense, that could also bleed into the other podcast called The Switch, right? How do you flick the switch between just consuming and crafting into doing all that, but also mending, right? And finding a new balance in your way of life to make to have a different impact on the world, right? So that's my introduction. I hope you're up for the discussion and for the debate, right? Because it's going to be a monologue for starters here in this post. But as I said, there is an article, and most importantly, I'm interested in having the conversation, right? Getting your comments and feedback, and feeding what's going to come next in Sustainics, right? So that won't be just on this topic. There's plenty to talk about, but I think it's a good starting point in our consumerist society to resurface the concept of repairing and mending. All right, on to the first topic. First off, I want to talk about the obvious, which is the need we have to repair for the sake of repairing material things, right? And I think it comes down to our personal experience, right? Hopefully we've all done that at some point in our life, having items that we love and which have been broken and that are hard to procure, right? So out of sheer necessity, instead of thinking immediately about going to the shops to replace it and buy a new one, we would look at a way to repair it, right? So that could be a piece of clothing that we would sew or do something about, or a pair of shoes that eventually, it's a pair of shoes you love so much that you would go to the shoemaker and to the cobbler, right, to get repaired, because if it's just a heel that popped out, it's easy enough to put some glue and fix it, right? So there's an intense reward and pleasure in mending things that we love, right? This is actually probably the natural state we were and mindset we would embrace for anything that has been part of our daily life, an item, a piece of clothing, as I said, we would do that, right? It's much harder when it's commodity, right? When it comes down to a glass or any object, produced in large series, and we would say, oh, okay, it's broken. Nowadays, it's so easy to just pick the pieces, the shattered pieces, and put them in the bin, and then say that's okay. I will procure another one. Right? There's really a difference between the mindset of repairing an object because you love it and because it's quite unique and you're attached to it, versus other more commodity objects which are produced in large series, and that of course you would less spontaneously think about replacing them, especially in our modern societies where things are commodity, they are cheap, and you just have to go to the shop or to order on Amazon or like the same object and drop the old one to the bin. Well, I like something which exists in the Japanese culture in that regard, which is really about the fact that even a commodity object, such as a vase, for instance, or a glass, as we said, or a piece of kitchenware, like a plate. The Japanese have an approach, and I think it's called Kintsugi, or Kintsugi, which is this philosophy of saying, well, if this object is broken, I can repair it, and there's a way to repair it that is going to make it whole again, but in a way that is going to give it even more value, right? A sentimental value, because I'm going to invest a little bit of myself in this repair, a little bit of time, a little bit of emotion, a little bit of material, and I think the Japanese have developed an art in particular for, as I said, plates or vases or this kind of kitchenware to repair them by gluing them with gold, right? So you end up having pieces of ceramics beautifully seared and put back together with gold between holding the pieces together, right? So, and that makes suddenly an object which was just part of a series and a generic one becomes unique with its unique scars and injuries and traumas of the past which have been mended, right? And now this item, which has been made whole again through time, personal investment, and gold, in that case, is becoming unique. So I really like this this idea, which is moving from a second step down the food chain or the process of the mending mindset, so to speak. But then, if really we're talking about everyday items, everyday life, we can see nowadays that we're buying and throwing very liberally, right? Suffice to see the state of our bins, right? Even in countries like ours, like Switzerland, where I am today, where we try to recycle a lot of things, PET, aluminium, white iron, glass, stained glass versus white glass, all that, paper, cardboard, organics for composting. This is great, right? But still, there's still always something that is going to end up in a landfill, right? So it takes a little bit of thinking, of rational thinking, to figure out how really we could change our behavior so that this thing that I'm buying is not going to end up in a landfill, right? Unnecessarily, unless there is no other choice, right? And I think that there are a lot of very powerful ideas along the lines of, short cycle, circular economy, and these things. So when I'm talking, for instance, about circular economy, it's the fact that, since the 40s, 50s, since the end of World War II, with our consumption society, we've been accustomed to the fact that, we could buy items and eventually dispose of them in a very linear manner. But it takes a lot of steps and processes to do that, right? So it takes the fact that we're taking resources from the environment, we're manufacturing resources, we make something. It takes energy and time and raw materials to do that. We transform eventually some elements into more complex items, typically with the plastic industry. So we manufacture plastic, and then plastic in turn is used to do a lot of things, furniture, clothing, etc. We use it, right, for a period of time, and then eventually, it's collected, and either it goes to waste, or if we're lucky, it's recycled through transformation. But it's a very long and linear cycle, right? So really, the opportunity of mending, repairing, and reusing is not just the idea of having a circular economy by giving to your local charity an item so that it's reused, which is great, right? With charities like Emmaus here or Guineas, this kind of organizations, which do a great job, by the way, at shifting items from one person to the other for free or for a minimal fee, not for profit. There's also this idea that the cycle could be even shorter. And, if you're throwing away something because it's not broken but worn out, maybe there's an opportunity to repair it. For instance, by repainting it, giving it a little bit of varnish. If it's a piece of furniture, this kind of thing. Or taking this piece of curtain and, make a piece of furniture or a pillowcase, for instance, or a tablecloth. That's right. So there is really this idea that repairing an item and repurposing it is going to participate to having shorter loops and participate into what we call the circular economy of reusing and repairing things instead of disposing of them. Right? So I think that's quite a powerful idea. So what else could we say? That could be the same in the way you think as a business about procuring things, procuring pieces of furniture, right? So of course you would think new immediately, and you would go to your IKEA shop or alike and buy a new piece of thing. But there is a possibility to go through the conscious process of thinking, what's the destination of the piece of furniture I need, right? Or is there an opportunity to look in other parts of the business and maybe taking these chairs here, which are here and nobody uses anymore, and repurpose them into another space? I had that recently in the place I'm working in, where, people were whinging because our kitchen was all refurbished with used chairs and used tables, which presumably had been taken from another location, which probably was refurbished. But instead of throwing these chairs and tables, which were perfect use, really you could hardly notice a few scratches here and there, they've been repurposed and put back into another kitchen, a smaller one in another office. And that makes total sense, right? So I'm thinking that there's smart procurement here, right, at play. There's smart inventory management. There's really fine stewardship and of the assets of the company. Right? Thinking that this is money, this is energy, and instead of just throwing that to the tip, actually, and before even I considered giving that away to someone else, right, to a charity, actually there's a use I can think of internally, right? So that's this kind of mindset we are talking about. So maybe they did repair here was the act of probably cleaning, maybe putting a lick of paint here and there on some scratches, maybe changing the cushions under the legs of the chairs and the tables, and making sure that you had a set that could go again, right? And go for another round of life cycle within the organization without having to be ditched and replaced by something new, something that would come at a cost to the environment, right? So I like this kind of mindset, right? So that's what we're talking about. Changing our own mindset and changing the organization's mindset towards thinking about these things that we take for granted and we consider as commodity. Actually, we need to think what this entails, throwing it away and procuring a new one, right? So, and there's a lot of dimensions, right? There's the dimension of jobs. And so one would argue that buying new stuff is going to create jobs. Yeah, okay, fair enough. But is it resource friendly in terms of, we know that we're living in a world where resource is finite, whether that be logs and wood for furniture, or carbon, fossil fuels for plastic and all that, right? So is this resource friendly? Can I imagine a tailor-made solution that with the things I already have, and maybe rebuild something, or do I really need to go outside? Is it climate friendly? So of course now when you buy new things, they are trying to remove this kind of guilt about climate and the environment by giving you the ability to pay for a slight, very small eco tax, or or CO2 or carbon footprint compensation. Marketers again at IKEA, and I'm not mentioning IKEA because I hate them. I have my own IKEA furniture, right? We'll come back to IKEA in Sustainics on for the good, the bad, and the ugly of IKEA as well, right? But yeah, so they are very clever, these marketers, at addressing the increasing concern we all have as citizens and consumers about that. But yeah, don't be fooled, right? This eco tax or carbon footprint compensation will never be better than the effort and the imagination and the creativity you will produce in repurposing and repairing what you already own, right? What is already handy, right? And if really you want to convince yourself about the impact it has, right, you have to think about every time you buy a new object, about the long chain it's been through, right? Before it came to your shelf and to your apartment, right? That's true for fruits and veggies, for instance, right? When you think about buying responsibly bananas or kiwis or capsicums, and when you look at the fact that you live in Switzerland and they're coming from Peru or South Africa, then you have to figure out what has been the process and all the steps taken to bring this to my plate at a marginal cost, but at an invisible and probably very high cost to the environment, right? So you need to inform yourself about the cycle, not only of manufacturing but the logistics, right? A simple example that I can take that would speak to everyone would be, for instance, to imagine, how I got this jacket, right? How did it come to me? It's got wool in it, right? So it all started with a sheep somewhere in Scotland, in France, or in New Zealand, and from the sheep, sheared, we produce the yarn, right? And the yarn has been turned into this, eventually through a lot of textile tie manufacturing, into rolls of fabric, and eventually into this jacket. And then this jacket, at some point, what happened to it is that it might become worn out. So if really it's got a bit of a scratch in the inner pocket, I might have to take it to the alteration parlor, which is next to me, right? Or do a little bit of a repair myself, right? Sewing it myself. But eventually, I will probably either give it away to Viennese or to Emmaus, or throw it into a bin for fabric, right? Or maybe I'll reuse it to produce another. Back in the days, my grandmother would have said, "Oh, I can do maybe some nice towels for Christmas," right? All of that. But eventually, if it doesn't do that, it's going to end up, being either in landfill or in some form of recycling, and then eventually, hopefully, it's not going to pollute the environment, and it's going to turn into compost somehow, the wool part of it, and then turn into grass and come back to the ship. Right? So the long cycle of materials. And we need to keep in mind that nothing is created, nothing is destroyed, right? It's only a long cycle of transformation, right? So things are not disappearing magically, right? Because they go in the bin and they go into the garbage truck. It's not our problem anymore. No, it is. This material that we've been responsible for buying and for throwing away they are going to end up somewhere, and hopefully we need to make sure that they end up without harming the environment. So this kind of circular thinking is, I think, is really important to start changing your mindset about mending stuff, right? And the other way to visualize, how responsible and accountable we are when buying stuff and making the right choice in the kind and the quality of item we're buying is to think about this, our responsibility around this purchase as an iceberg, right? And the tip of the iceberg would be the price. That's what we see above the surface, right? The price. We go on e-commerce websites, Amazon or similar, and we buy based on the price. Eventually, we look at origins and composition, but there's a lot actually under the surface. The body of the iceberg of accountability encompasses a lot, and it's about workers' compensation. How well have been the workers producing the item I'm buying? How well have they been paid and compensated? I remember the other day looking at the scandal of the Mars company producing Mars bars and sneakers, for instance, right, out of cocoa harvested in Africa, out of child labor, which probably received cents, peanuts, right, for the work they have done of picking the coconut beans, right, the cocoa beans, right. So with that, all the child abuse potentially, or human slavery, or unfair wages and compensations, or unfair work environment for some workers. Same goes with some cashew nuts, right, in India, where you can see these workers with their hands completely destroyed, right, their fingers destroyed because they don't have any gloves to pick them from them and to remove the shell from them. So you've got that. You need to think about the pollution this item may have caused. And of course, there's carbon footprint, right? There's a measure of carbon footprint, which is quite abstract. It's the best we came up with so far. But there's a lot also of unseen, uncharted, and poorly documented consequences on the environment, like effluents going out of factories into waterbeds and water tables, right? There's a lot of that. So we need to think about the manufacturing process and the location, the origin of the items, and what's the regulation surrounding that, and how protective is it from and responsible is it towards the environment, right? There's all the energy cost. So that's the carbon footprint. How much energy was used to produce them and to transport them? Example of the kiwis coming from Peru or capsicums coming from South Africa and then there's an important component, which is the repairability of the item, right? So assuming the item has been built fairly responsibly so far in terms of workers' compensation, respect of the environment, lean energy, all that. But then, is the item I'm buying a one-time use? And if it breaks, is it going to break at once, or is it made of components that are replaceable? That's typically the conversations that we had in Europe, in particular, over the last few years about the repairability index of things like home appliances, washing machines, and the like. Right? We don't want to start throwing away a washing machine because there's just a part of it which is broken, like a joint or a tube or a connector of any kind. Right? We want to make sure that this washing machine can last for years, 10 years, maybe even more, and have its parts easily replaceable. Same goes with mobile phones, right? Or computers, right? How repairable are they, right? They tend to be more and more compact. We could talk about that. We'll talk about that at some point about Apple and the different approach they're taking to that thing. Yeah, it's not repairable, but we made other choices to make sure that this item is environmentally responsible. Clearly, it's not it's very hardly repairable, even if you go to your Genius bar, right? So the repairability of the item you're buying is an important consideration. Am I going to be able to repair it? Right? I'm not going to talk about cars, which are another example where nowadays modern drivers and consumers like me and you If our car breaks, I've got no clue about what I'm going to do about it, right? Especially if it's in the engine, so much electronics, right? But I would presume that if I go to my local dealer, right, they would be able to have access to a sufficiently granular, in a sufficiently granular way to the car to be able to replace just the part needed, and not tell me you need a new car altogether, or you need an entire new engine or an entire new battery. Okay, which leads into, of course, the conversation about spare parts, thinking about this ability. Usually, an item becomes repairable, also, especially if it's a complex assembly of technology, right? It's important to think about the spare parts, right, or the consumables, right? That would be the example of printers, typically. They sell to us printers which are worth nothing apparently anymore. To pay for the printer $50, right? Canon, HP, all of that, right? It's quite a complex piece of engineering, right? And full of plastic and metal and technology and electronics. It's $50. But then the consumables, which are just ink, can be a toner, cost a fortune. Right? I think ink for inkjet printers is the most valuable liquid on earth, right? Even more valuable than perfume, than Chanel No. 5. So you really need to look at the big picture when you buy an item. It's not just the price, of course. It's its origin, the social impact it had, the environmental impact it had through materials, through pollution, through energy, and how well designed it is, how repairable is it, and are the spare parts produced responsibly as well, right? It's not just about the item, but the spare parts or the consumables, right? Which are important. Then I could also add the energy efficiency when it comes down to appliances, but fortunately enough, now in Europe, we've got a scale for this kind of things: energy consumption, water consumption, typically rating from A to E, right? So that's a number of things, right? You can consider when you think about reigniting your mending mindset and your rekindling the forward and art of repairing items. I'd like to come back one more time, still in this remit of physical repairs, before we move on to more abstract forms of repair, to the fact that if you look, even at comparing repairing versus recycling, there is, again, recycling is great, don't get me wrong, but it tends to make us guilt-free. It's a good way to say, oh, don't worry, it's going to be recycled. I can throw it because it's going in a bin and it's going to be recycled. Great. Yeah, but recycling is very, very tedious and expensive as well. And it requires plenty of steps and lots of people in the entire process, right? So if really you think about what goes on from the moment you put something in the bin, there's transport involved, right? There's sorting involved. There's probably, a lot of energy involved. There's chemicals eventually involved, at some point for papers, for some forms of plastic. There's a lot of labor. Right? There's workers, maybe, and would that be even robotic work in the future? Right? That would be the same. There's a lot of packaging. Even recycled material, they need to be repackaged, but rebundled somehow, and then transported again, right, to a new purchaser, right? So it's incredibly, it's a big change, and it's better than putting things blindly into a landfill. That's a big change. We've got recycling with a lot of steps, processes, and money, resources involved. And then you've got repairing, which, to the contrary, just entails two things. You, as a fixer, and then potentially a few parts and materials, right, that you could have handy, or that, of course, you could procure from the shop. Would that be thread and needles to repair your socks or your pieces of clothing, or would that be ultra glue to bring together a piece of glass, right? But at the end of the day, it's so simple. It cannot be shorter. You need to think about yourself as a fixer, right? And you look at this item, which is needs maintenance, reconditioning, or repair if really it's broken. But it's such a lost opportunity if you don't take this time to think about yourself as a fixer and just think about what sort of parts do I have handy that will avoid either me procuring an entirely a new one and would avoid people down the chain to do all this recycling hassle. Right? So I think that's quite a compelling argument if you think about it, right? So I'll conclude here on this first part, right, about the mending spirit, the mending mindset, and rekindling the subtle and forgotten art of repairing. But I hope that increased your awareness about how important it is and how what's the opportunity, right, to become again ingenious and patient and involved, including emotionally involved and personally involved in repairing items, furniture, clothing around us before we consider any options. Repair and fixing should be the first go-to option that you consider. And then if that fails, then you think about the rest. All right, that's a lot already for part one, but I'll continue in a minute talking about now how we want to repair relationships. Stay tuned.